21. Jonathan Meiburg, in 1997, at the tender age of 21, received a Thomas J. Watson Fellowship to travel to remote communities around the world. It was a year-long journey that sparked fascination with islands, birds, and the deep history of the living world. In his new book, A Most Remarkable Creature, The Hidden Life and Epic Journey of the World's Smartest Birds of Prey, published by Knopf, uses the lives and evolutionary journeys of these unusual falcons called caracaras and the people who live among them to tell a remarkable story about the history of life in the Americas. It's been praised as one of the year's best, earning accolades from writers and scientists, including David Sibley, Margaret Atwood, Jennifer Ackerman, Scott Wiedenthal, Carl Safina, Laurie Anderson, and media from the Wall Street Journal to NPR have all praised this book. Dallas Morning News, and I love this quote, Dallas Morning News wrote that to call this a bird book would be like calling Moby Dick a whaling manual. Having read this book, I have to agree, this is a remarkable and very thoughtful study on a number of different topics. Jonathan Meiburg has also written on subjects ranging from a hidden exhibit hall in the American Museum of Natural History and the last long-form interview with the author, Peter Mathiasson. He leads the indie rock band Shearwater, and his unique career between the sciences makes him an ideal guide for a journey that takes in the history and the landscapes of the entire continent, from the forests of Guyana to the windswept Falkland Islands. So please join me in welcoming Jonathan Meiburg and his discussion on the striated caracara. And what we're going to do now, if you'll pardon the clumsiness, is I'm going to stop my share and let him start his share. And while he's doing that, I'm going to queue up a question for him. And speaking of questions, if you do have questions, feel free to enter them into the chat, and we will cover those questions at the end of our little talk. So feel free to pound those questions into the chat room, and we'll be there as quick as we can be. So Jonathan, most of us here know about crested caracaras, and we see them pretty often in Bexar County, but not everyone is aware that there's really quite a number of species of caracaras. Can you explain exactly what they are and why they don't seem much like any other kind of bird? Okay, I can't hear you, Jonathan. You're muted.
There we are. Hello, everyone. As Britt just said, thank you for that very generous introduction. We're going to be talking about birds that aren't really pollinators in any way that I know of, but they are birds that you may know well because you've got a species in your own backyard. This is a crested caracara, northern crested caracara. We'll see the southern one in a minute, but there are actually 10 species of caracaras. The northern caracaras that you see are the northernmost of the bunch, and they range all the way up through Mexico and into the United States. They've even, as we'll see, gone as far as Canada sometimes. But they're in Central and South America. There are 10 other species, and it's something I didn't know before I started working on this book was that South America does not have crows, or they have some jays in the tropics, but there are no big black crows in the genus Corvus, no ravens, no carrion crows. And in a way, it seems as if they have caracaras instead. Now, why that is something I go into in the book, and it has a lot to do with the fact that North and South America were not actually connected until relatively recently in geological time, like 3 to 5 million years ago. And they were entirely different worlds of wildlife up until that point, and then started exchanging animals at that time. So the caracaras have come up from South America, along with animals, like armadillos, possums, and porcupines. But here's one. This one's in Hidalgo County, actually just south of you in Edinburgh, at this extraordinary place called the Martin Refuge. And let's see. There he is hanging out with one of his friends, a turkey vulture. and a black vulture there. They feed them meat from a local taxidermist every week there. And so you can, if you go there, you can see sometimes, 20, 30, 40 caracaras all hanging out together. It's really quite extraordinary. And you can see in this picture, the bird in the center here has sort of a yellow face, but then in the background you can see this one is almost blue, and this one's sort of more pink. They're able to change the color of their facial skin by flushing blood out of it. In the case of if they have an orange face, that means it's full of blood. If they're an adult, they have yellow skin, and so when they drain the blood from their face looks yellow. The younger birds haven't yet acquired the yellow pigment, so when they drain blood out of their faces, they look blue. It's the only bird of prey that I know of that changes its facial color depending on how it's feeling. But the falcons are such an interesting group. We know the peregrine falcon, the kestrel, the merlin, all the falcons of the northern world we think of as these sort of peerless hunters. And but they're only one branch of that family because the largest diversity of falcons actually is in South America. And I think that their earliest ancestors probably came up from Antarctica back when it was warm, before 30 million years ago. And in a way, what we think of the true falcons, like the peregrine, are kind of a specialized offshoot of a more generalized group. And the caracaras actually have a muscle in their leg that the true falcons have lost. And they're very good at getting around on the ground. They're scavengers, they're opportunists, they're very, very intelligent in a very sort of crow-like, or if you like, even human-like way. And they like to hang out with other scavengers. This is a scene you can see fairly often of black vultures and crested caracaras preening one another. Sometimes they roost together. They're just part of this scavenging guild, which also in your part of the world includes ravens. You can even see black vultures, crested caracaras, and ravens by the side of the road eating a white-tailed deer. And it's a wonderful sight because it's sort of like three different models of the same kind of animal that have evolved in different places are all meeting right where you are, which is really special. But as Britt mentioned, one of the species that's sort of the star of my book and the one that starts me off on the whole journey is one that's found all the way down at the bottom of South America. And I'll show you where it lives in just a moment. But it was seen by Charles Darwin back in 1833. And I have here, what we're looking at is the only contemporary illustration of Darwin aboard the Beagle. Darwin's here in the middle, in the top hat. And I think that's Captain Fitzroy next to him. And you can see everyone's bringing him all these different items. The cartoonist has labeled things with a little bit of a sense of humor. It says Tusk 2003 BC here. And this guy over here is carrying shells in a hat, and he says, the least I can get for these is a tot. And so I think Darwin was paying people to bring him stuff, which would have been a long-standing tradition. You can see there's a guy trying to bring him a whole palm tree. And over on this side, there's a guy who says, I've killed a fine specimen of a flying monkey, shot 3 specimens of geese, and was very near being yaffled by a damn big bear. And sure enough, in his hands, he's got a flying monkey that the ship's cat or maybe dog is interested in there. But what's funny is that Darwin, shortly after this, would travel, as he was going south on the east side of South America, to the Falklands. And in the Falklands, he would meet an animal that people did in fact call flying monkeys. You can see where the Falklands are here. They're down off the coast of Patagonia, way down south. This is only about 700 miles from the Antarctic Peninsula. There's a blow up of the Falklands there. And then I'm going to show you an image from the place where the book begins, which is a place called the Jason Islands, one of the wildest parts of the Falklands. There are almost 700 islands in the archipelago. Most of them are very tiny. And the whole thing's about the size of Connecticut. But the Jasons are a truly wild place. And these two largest islands, Steeple Jason and Grand Jason, had sheep on them in the 20th century for a time, but then they were taken off, and now they're just wildlife sanctuaries. And here is Steeple Jason. Now here, this is taken in the wintertime. Some common winter residents of the island are gentoo penguins, which aren't breeding at that time, but they come in to roost during the day after having run the gauntlet and avoided sea lions trying to get at them. And then here's a young striated caracara zooming in over them to see what's available, and if any penguins might have gotten injured on the way, that he might be able to help along to their into the afterlife, or to more likely nibble on their leavings as they sort of squirt out bits of half-digested fish and squid. This is you can see this actually my shadow in the foreground of this picture. This is how close you can get to these animals in this place. And here's an adult striated caracara, a very handsome fella with his clear blue-gray bill and yellow legs and chestnut trousers, and then the streaking, that's where the word striated comes from, these striations on its neck. But it really is sort of like you crossed a raven with a hawk, is almost what they look like. And people were confused for a while about what they actually were. Now, in the summertime, they feed on the immense colonies of seabirds that live in the Falklands. There's albatrosses and penguins and burrowing petrels and all kinds of seabirds that nest on these islands in very, very dense aggregations. And this striated caracara here is standing on the nest of a black-browed albatross, which albatrosses they're a little bit like giant seagulls, if you want to picture them that way. This is one of the smaller species of albatross that they have, and it's still got a wingspan of about 8 feet. So in the wintertime, all these seabirds go to sea. They can drink salt water, they can feed at sea, they don't need to come to land for any reason. And the caracaras have to sit there and figure out what to do. So what we found on some islands is that they spend a lot of time digging in the ground for worms and grubs and other invertebrates. This group of young birds, which you can, they're different from the older birds, like with the crested caracaras, as I was showing you, in that they're much darker in coloration. They don't have the bright yellow legs or faces. And that thing that's bulging out in the middle of the bird in the middle there's nothing wrong with it. That's its crop. Like some vultures, a lot of caracaras have a crop that protrudes when they're eating. And it seems to be a way to they can just sort of gorge themselves on whatever is at hand and then spend a little more time digesting it later. But I took this picture with my phone. That's how close you can get to these birds. Now, people have only been in the Falklands for about 200 years, and which makes them a really extraordinary place in all of the Americas, because along with, I think, the Galapagos, they are probably the only place that Europeans actually discovered in the entire New World. And it means that their wildlife, you get to experience it as if you're new to it in some ways. Darwin was really stunned because the caracaras that he met, the striated caracaras in the Falklands, would steal hats and a compass and all kinds of different objects from the crew of the Beagle. And he couldn't work out why they were doing this, and said they were just unbelievably tame and curious and inquisitive. And I think the reason is because they didn't have much experience with humans at all. And it's very weird to visit them because this is how they act towards you. They behave as if they have every right to be there just as much as you do. And what are you doing here? This is Lorraine McGill, a Falkland Islander, with a group of striated caracaras that beg for kitchen scraps behind her back door. Here's one looking in to see what I might be eating for dinner. This is me on an island called New Island, where there's actually a trap underneath there that's got some meat on it. But these birds aren't stuck there. They're all just aggregating around that spot, and they couldn't care less that I was there, so far as I could tell. Now, this bird is in England. There are some captive striated caracaras in England and in a few other places, and I get into why that and how that happened in the book, which I won't go into right now. But in captivity, they are extraordinary. There are a lot of falconry parks in England, and the falconry parks that have caracaras often use them in flying demonstrations. Now, if you've seen a flying demonstration, you've probably seen a hawk fly to a perch, or an owl, or maybe a falcon diving at a bait that's twirled on a line. But they don't like to do this kind of thing. They like to solve puzzles, play games, and they love new activities. Anything new is really exciting to them, which is very strange compared to most other birds of prey, and especially most other falcons. This bird was named Tina, and she could identify stuffed animals by name from a set of little toys that her keeper, Jeff, there would throw behind his back. She could also identify objects by shape and color. And some of this behavior makes a little more sense when you know, as we learned relatively recently, that the nearest relative of falcons is not hawks and eagles and other birds of prey. It's actually parrots. And you can see an almost sort of parrot-y kind of mind in these birds that I think the true falcons have basically lost as they became peerless hunters. This is Evita. She's another young striated caracara with one of her favorite toys there. This is William Henry Hudson, who was a naturalist and writer who was born in Argentina, south of Buenos Aires in the Pampas. And then he was 27, I guess, after his parents died, he moved to England and never returned. And he became, after a long time of sort of wandering in the wilderness, a celebrated writer and naturalist. He wrote novels. He was one of the founders of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. But he loved writing about the wildlife that he knew in his youth. And he was the first author to write in English anything complimentary about caracaras. Darwin, like many other naturalists after him, called them false eagles, said they ill became so high a rank, called their habits disgusting. You see this kind of thing over and over again. And Hudson, with especially these birds, this is a southern crested caracara, all the way down in Tierra del Fuego, thousands of miles from its northern cousins. Their distributions sort of divide to Amazon, but they're extremely similar. That's a pair of them in the Falklands. Very handsome birds. And then there's a group of them, fledglings about to leave the nest. Now, unlike the true falcons, caracaras build nests, some of which are huge, crested caracaras in particular, that just pile on all these sticks and bones and scraps of wool and anything that they can find. And Hudson also knew this bird really well, which is called a chimango. It's about the size of a crow, absolutely common on farms in the countryside throughout southern South America. So common, in fact, that people tend to ignore them. There's even a saying in Argentina, no gastes pólvora en chimango, which means don't waste your ammunition on a chimango. It's like a shorthand for something common, annoying, and worthless. But Hudson said that a bird so cosmopolitan in its habits would have more than a volume to itself in England, but being only a poor foreigner, it has had no more than a few unfriendly paragraphs bestowed upon it. But he was amazed at their feats of learning, of innovation. They seemed to learn from one another about what to eat, and were figured out how to manipulate people and animals to do what they wanted. And he was just fascinated by them. This is a carunculated caracara, which is up in the Andes in Colombia and Ecuador, a beautiful bird, and one that features in a lot of sort of folk tales and legends that date from the days of the Inca, and in fact, probably long before them. And they are generally seen as kind of good luck. And here you have a procession of people in Riobamba, Ecuador, who are actually dressed as carunculated caracaras, or curiquingues, as they're called, and they're taking part in an Inti Raymi festival, which is the Incas' festival of the solstice. And these characters sort of parade through the town and bestow good fortune on everyone. A little further south in the Altiplano, this is really high up on this giant plateau that's the largest and highest plateau outside of Tibet in the world, the sort of central swelling of the Andes that's at the intersection of Peru, Chile, and Bolivia. And it's where the Andes sort of look like they've a snake that swallowed an egg. It's this really big bulge that has huge saline lakes and salt flats on it. And these are vicuñas, which are the wild ancestors of alpacas, grazing on nearly invisible desert grass. And this is where mountain caracaras live. And this one is standing on the ruins of Machu Picchu. And the Inca, like people there before them, I think regarded them also kind of as good luck and as tokens of royalty. Inca emperors were the only people permitted to wear their feathers. And this is Inca Huáscar, who was the brother of Atahualpa, and depicted wearing mountain caracara feathers in his mascapaicha, which is the ceremonial headdress that the Inca emperors wore. This mountain caracara, however, has decided to abandon the desert and live in a high-rise. It's in La Paz, Bolivia, and this picture was taken just last year during the pandemic, where this bird kept visiting this ledge on an apartment block, and the people there started feeding it bits of corn and ground beef and this kind of thing, and it liked it so well that it brought 2 more friends, and they built a nest and have started breeding there. And this is sort of a constant theme with caracaras. They learn to deal with people, they learn to deal with the environments that we create, and they figure out ways to make it work for them. This is a species called a white-throated caracara that's just to the south of the mountain caracaras down in southern Chile. This bird's not seen very often, actually, but it's was described by Darwin, and as you can see, it's not really very different from a mountain caracara. Whether it should be its own species or not, I'm not entirely sure. But it's hanging out with a friend that we know well from Central Texas, a black vulture. Once again, these two models of birds sort of complement each other very well. Another part of the book concerns what I think are probably the very weirdest caracaras, and in some ways the most wonderful. Guyana is one of the three countries that along the geological formation called the Guyana Shield, which, unlike the Andes, is a range of really ancient low mountains, kind of like the Smokies of the Appalachians, in the northeast corner of South America. And it's also home to some of the largest expanses of tropical forest that have not been logged in the entire continent. And in part of the book, I went to southern Guyana to find a species called red-throated caracaras in the company of four people. This is Josie George, Rambo Roberts, Brian Duncan, and there's Josie again with one of the fish from this river called the Rewa River that we ascended. It's called a vampire fish or payara. They're delicious, but you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of them. And this is a stone carved by people thousands of years ago, perhaps. It's hard, you can't date things like this, but this is a place where people would have sharpened stone tools. People have been in the Americas, of course, for quite a long time. We just saw a couple of weeks ago, they found footprints in New Mexico that dated to 23,000 years ago. So people have been walking around all over the Americas for quite some time. And this is our fourth person. This is Sean McCann. I'm sorry, I should have given you a trigger warning for arachnophobes. This is not a piece of costume jewelry. It is, in fact, the largest spider in the world, the Goliath bird-eating tarantula, which lives in Guyana. And Sean adores spiders, so he was very pleased to have this one on his head. But he is the only person in recent time to have studied red-throated caracaras, and this is one of those. It's a bird that looks basically like a Muppet, and they're the only falcons that have bright red eyes and a bright red bare throat. And oddly enough, the main thing they eat is wasps' nests, not unlike honey buzzards in Eurasia, but honey buzzards have this sort of like thick, scale-like armor of feathers all around their faces. And the fact that these guys have bare throats and yet attack the nests of tropical wasps, it led some people to think that maybe they secreted a wasp repellent. So Sean, for his PhD research, went to French Guiana to study these birds and see if he could figure out if this was true, taking chemical samples from their skin and analyzing with a spectrometer, and doing all kinds of different experiments to see if there was any truth to this or not. I'll let you find out in the book whether or not they do, in fact, have a wasp repellent. But they are extraordinary birds in their own right. They live in troops of multiple individuals, 3 to 12 or 13 or 14, 15 birds, multiple males, multiple females. They nest in giant bromeliads and seem to raise one chick at a time, and they travel around a territory which they defend by these really elaborate displays of calling and basically dancing. They sort of seem more like a troop of primates than certainly than falcons. And they have, like all caracaras, this sort of questing, inquisitive expression. This is a baby red-throated caracara, the first photo, as far as I know, ever taken of one. So it's seeing a human being for the first time. This is 200 feet up in a tree in a giant bromeliad. And you can see bits of wasp comb there around it. And also down here, a millipede. Sean put a camera on this nest, and he found that the adults were bringing a lot of these millipedes to the nest, which they would sort of hold up to the chick and then drop and bite the heads of the millipedes to kill them. Why they were doing this, he's not quite sure, but his guess is that basically millipedes, part of the reason they've survived for more than 400 million years is that they're really terrible tasting. And they secrete these kinds of oily, nasty chemical substances from what are wonderfully called repugnatory glands. And he thinks they may be using them as a kind of pest control. to help keep down parasites in the nest, because there are an awful lot of those ticks and mosquitoes and phylornis flies and things like this in this area. So they may be using a kind of chemical technology, whether or not they have an actual wasp repellent in their own skin. This is a young yellow-headed caracara, and the animal, which is, because of the angle, it's sort of hard to tell what that animal is. That's a tapir, which is a very weird, it sort of looks like a cross between a donkey and a pig. They used to live in North America, but they've died out here, but they went into South America after the continents joined up, and they survived down there. This tapir is not dead. It's doing great. This little yellow-headed caracara is grooming it for ticks and botflies and other ectoparasites. And this is a long-standing association, it seems, because when these birds come around tapirs, the tapirs will actually will roll over onto their backs and let themselves be groomed by these birds. The same is also true of this species, the black caracara, which hangs out along river edges in the tropics in South America. And there's a Wapishana Amerindian word for it, means a tapir bird. Here's a black caracara dealing with yet another black vulture. This vulture just decided it was going to take the caracara's dinner, and the caracara, as we watched it, was clearly trying to figure out what to do. And after a while of just staring at the vulture like this, it suddenly jumped down, grabbed a bit of these fish guts in one foot, and just hopped away on the other like this. Which is a pure caracara move, sort of clownish, inventive, and the black vulture seemed not too pleased about this, but gave up. And this is a Guadalupe caracara. This is in the Smithsonian in DC. And this is actually the type specimen of this species. And Guadalupe caracaras, which, as you can sort of tell looking at it, are related to crested caracaras. They lived on the island of Guadalupe, not the one in the Caribbean, but it was off the coast to the west of Baja California. And has the distinction of being the only species of predatory bird to have been wiped out by humans in historical time. They lived only on this island, and the bird collector Rollo Beck visited the island on December 1st, 1900, saw 11 of them, shot 9 of them, said the other 2 got away, and no one ever saw them again. So this one, I think, was collected in 1879. And this here is another northern crested caracara, like the ones you have there. But this bird is a wild bird that happens to be in Skykomish, Washington, about 30 miles east of Seattle. And it's part of what seems to be a wave of northern crested caracara sightings. It's hard to tell if people are simply reporting these sightings more or if there actually are more of them. But black vultures are certainly expanding their range. And because they kind of go together, I wonder if they're really following black vultures back into northern North America. Because they used to be here during the Pleistocene, when there were giant ground sloths and dire wolves and short-faced bears and all the things we find in the La Brea tar pits. There are also crested caracaras in the La Brea tar pits and fossil crested caracaras in Arkansas. So we may be witnessing a rare reversal of some of the Pleistocene extinctions when you see these birds reoccupying their old habitat here in the northern part of North America. This down here, and this is the last slide I have in this presentation, is a really interesting place. It's called Diego Ramirez, and it is south even of Cape Horn. This is the last point of land on the South American continent. And there are penguins breeding here, there are albatrosses breeding here, and there are striated caracaras breeding here. Darwin heard about them, but he didn't land here in 1833. And so far as I know, these are the southernmost birds of prey in the entire world. And it's especially poignant to me that they're sort of sitting on the doorstep of the place that they probably came from, which is Antarctica. And they're as close as any of the falcons now live to there. But most caracara populations are pretty healthy so far as we know, although they're very data deficient for species like the yellow-headed and the black caracara. But striated caracaras are about as numerous as giant pandas. They only live in the Falklands and on a few of these outer islands in Tierra del Fuego. So part of my goal, other than just trying to show you that these birds are fascinating in the book, is to suggest ways that we might be able to help protect them in a time when birds that live on islands are imperiled pretty much by default. And I wanted to show you one clip of a striated caracara in the Falklands, just to give you a sense of their personality a little bit. Let's see here. This is on Steeple Jason, that island I showed you back in the beginning. Can you see that? Brett, can you see this?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so these are my hiking poles and my bag. This is a young bird, and young birds are especially curious, but they're all pretty much like this. It's like he's going to walk away with them somehow. Watch what he does. Or she. Striated caracaras call, especially young birds, when they've found something they're interested in, especially food, and which seems sort of counterintuitive because it brings in all of their friends right away. But sort of like with ravens, this seems to be, in some cases, kind of a technique for overcoming territorial adults that might be in the area, because if you've got this mob of teenagers raiding the fridge, there's really not much you can do about it. So this bird messes with these for a little bit. Okay, it's over here.
So while this is going on, do these striated caracaras have a good sense of smell?
That's a good question, and we don't know the answer. The crested caracaras have shown experimentally some evidence of having a sense of smell. Doesn't seem to be as good as turkey vultures, but the sense of smell in birds is an interesting subject because it isn't studied as much as it ought to be. And see, there's this buddy over there doing exactly the same thing with my backpack. We'll almost be done with these here in a second. The little bird called a synclodes is going to come, or a tussock bird is going to come running up, which often follows striated caracaras around because it'll go through the things that they dig up. Here comes the synclodes. And that's Kalinka Rexer-Huber, who was leading the study. So, in answer to your question about a sense of smell, I don't know. They are extremely observant. So I have a feeling that they probably rely more on their eyesight than on smell, but I can't say it for sure.
Yeah. You had mentioned that the birds were imperiled by default, and I'm assuming that was due to the concerns around climate change and sea rise.
Yeah, and what's happening to the oceans, because in the case of that species in particular, it depends on marine resources. I mentioned that they're depending on seabirds, chicks and eggs in the summertime for food, and also the droppings and carrion associated with colonies of seals and sea lions. And these are animals that feed in the ocean. So they depend on these animals, and these animals, of course, depend on the health of the oceans for their food. There was one measure just recently of mercury levels in striated caracaras on an island in Argentina called Isla de los Estados, and they found the highest concentrations of mercury ever found in a population of birds, full stop.
Wow.
So they really, even though they don't swim, they're participating in a marine ecosystem.
Right, right. So the concern wasn't around sea level rise. The concern was around the actual uh, food stocks that are in the ocean
Yeah,
themselves
ocean
and the
ecosystems. Yeah,
ocean ecosystems that
but
are
sea
in
level rise
danger.
also matters because if islands, if you raise sea level, islands shrink. There's just no two ways about it. And in the Falklands, where they're essentially marooned, I think, by the wind, because the wind always blows from the west or southwest down there because of the rotation of the Earth and the circumpolar current. So there's pretty much no way for them to get back to the continent. So that population is pretty much stuck there. The ones in southern Tierra del Fuego, maybe not quite so much, but we don't know really what their numbers are, or even if there's any genetic traffic between those two populations or not.
Interesting, interesting. You had mentioned early on that they changed the color on their face, and of course, depending whether or not they're juveniles or adults, depends on what the color is. But what prompts them to drain the blood from their face and change that color?
It seems to be mostly kind of a dominance signal. I don't know that that's the only thing that they use it for, but adult territorial pairs and birds that are sort of trying to assert a territorial claim to something, sometimes even a source of food, will stand on it and their faces will change color, and they'll call. And I saw that even in down with the crested caracaras in Hidalgo County, where they'll do the same thing. Their faces will turn yellow if they sort of think that they're the one that's in charge. And often the one that's with a yellow face will be challenged or attacked by other birds that are trying to assert their own spot in the pecking order in that situation.
Interesting. Well, that does kind of bring up the concept of vision in birds, and many birds have the ability to see in the ultraviolet spectrum. Is that true for the caracaras, or do you know?
Unknown. No one has studied caracara vision except for one study on Chimango caracaras, which found the worst visual acuity ever measured in a bird of prey. However, it was still pretty good, but they don't have the size of an eyes relative to their head that, say, a peregrine does. But they don't need to. I mean, a peregrine has the kind of vision that you need to catch other birds on the wing. These guys have a much broader, sort of more ecumenical diet. They'll eat bread. They'll eat fly larvae. They'll eat just about anything. And so, a lot of the food that they're after doesn't necessarily run or fly away from them. Mountain caracaras, actually, I mentioned this in the book, have been seen working in small groups to turn over heavy rocks to try to get things out from underneath them, which is not a behavior I've seen, as far as I know, is reported for any other bird.
Okay. Well, let's go to the chat and see what kind of questions have come through on the chat. And if I can get this work. So in answer to your question around why they call that Confluence Park, it is the confluence of the San Antonio River and the San Pedro Creek. So
okay.
Yeah. So there is that. And yep. So, and it is a venue for the confluence of science and learning as well. So we were both kind of right in that regard. So what also go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say I'll take whatever questions anybody has at this point. Thanks for letting me ramble on about this and
no, absolutely a fascinating subject. What was the name of the refuge that you mentioned early on in your talk?
The Martin Refuge, Martin. It's a pretty extraordinary place. They've got little hides set up for people who like to do photography. They have some of those really nice Rio Grande Valley species like green jays and chachalacas and things that don't really come any further north than that. You can see them there and get really nice pictures of them. But it's the only caracara feeding station I know of in the state of Texas. It's mostly crested caracaras, as you probably know. If you've seen them, they don't tend to hang around. If you see them, they go away real quick. That's northern crested caracaras is the species that you have there.
Right.
And the Martin Refuge is located near Edinburgh, Texas. You can look it up online. And it's just, I mean, it's right, it's in a patch of native scrubland that's just about abuts the Rio Grande.
Okay, here's a question that reads, I've seen the crested caracara alongside vultures, and they look roughly to be the same size. But some of the photos you had of the other species of caracara made them look noticeably smaller than vultures. Do the various caracaras vary in size substantially?
They do. The Chimango and yellow-headed caracaras and black caracaras are the smallest. They're sort of crow-sized, and the cresteds are larger in accordance with the rule that biologists call Bergman's rule. The higher the latitude you go to, the larger the birds are, because if it's colder, it helps to have a larger body size to retain heat. So some of the southern crested caracaras are really quite big, but they vary. They do vary a lot in size. How did I become interested in caracaras? Are you interested in other birds? Yes. The caracaras were sort of my introduction. I imagine if you're like me, there was sort of a bird that really hooked you. And as Britt mentioned at the top of the talk, I had this funny traveling fellowship back in 1997 to visit remote human communities. And when I got to the Falklands, which is a very remote human community, I realized that you could see penguins there, and I thought, that would be exciting to see. So I went to an island where you could see colonies of breeding penguins, and there were striated caracaras there, and I'd never heard of these birds. I'd never seen a picture of them. I had no idea what they were. They just walked up to me and looked at me. And without being sort of mystical about it, I just felt like they were demanding an explanation or something. And I thought, what are they doing here? And when I found out that Darwin had the same question about them, he said, doubtless this bird, for some good reason, has chosen these islands for its metropolis. I thought, well, what is this, and why is it here, and why are there so few of them? And answering that question is sort of the quest of the loosely that frames the entire book, although it goes a lot of different places and talks about a lot of different things, because it turns out that the answer to that question is quite complicated, and it requires you to go almost all the way back to the Cretaceous extinctions to talk about why South America is the way it is, and why the caracaras are the way they are.
That's interesting. Yeah, actually, I had not realized that South America was distinct from North America and separated, and that had an impact on the evolutionary quality of the animals there.
Oh, yes. Yeah. South America was, at the time of the Cretaceous extinctions, when the asteroid impact near the Yucatan that killed off the big dinosaurs and a lot of other life on Earth, though not all of it, obviously, because we're sitting here, South America was almost isolated completely. It was joined by a little tiny strip of little isthmus to Antarctica, to the Antarctic Peninsula. That didn't break through until 30 million years later. And then for the following 30 million years, South America was like Australia. It was surrounded by ocean on all sides. And a world of wildlife evolved there that was really singular. I mean, some of them are things that you can see in natural history museums. Like, if you've ever seen these things look like big tanks, they're called glyptodonts. They're actually a giant relative of armadillos. But armadillos, sloths, and anteaters all share a common ancestor that was South American. And in fact, if you've ever wondered why we have one marsupial in North America, that always seemed strange to me when I was a kid, because I thought, aren't they from Australia? Why do we have one here? Well, the reason is because they're not from Australia. Marsupials, the closest living relative of all the Australian marsupials, lives in Chile. And what seems to have happened is that marsupials originated either in South America or maybe perhaps in Antarctica, and crossed to Australia at a time when it was possible to do that, before the land bridges broke through and they diversified there. So marsupials are actually from South America. And even today, there are a lot of species of opossums, basically, in South America that we don't hear about very much. There's one that's like an otter. It's called a yapak, or a water possum. It has webbed feet and lives in streams.
That's interesting. You say that you daydream about living with pet Kara. Are you serious about that? I mean, really?
Yeah, I mean, it would be, I think, more work than I could handle. The people who keep them in England, as far as I know, there aren't any striated caracaras in captivity in the United States. I think there's one in Canada, but the people who keep them become very, very attached to them. And the caracaras become very attached to them too. It's they really are like friends. They crave social interaction in a way that most birds of prey don't. And
Right.
I just they're in the wild. They're endlessly curious, endlessly entertaining. I think if I could put you in front of them, you'd fall in love as quickly as I did.
Yeah. Well, one example of their intelligence in your book, you talk about Kara by the name of Tina, who
Yes.
was capable of doing some pretty remarkable things. You want to tell us a little bit about Tina?
Yeah, well, I showed you a picture of her where she was the one who could identify stuffed animals by name, and Jeff, her keeper, would ask his audience in little flying demonstrations. He'd throw out different colored balls and say, which one do you want her to get? And they'd say blue, and she'd go get the blue one.
And it
Or when he
wasn't
did
just colors, it was shapes as well. I
also
mean, she had
shapes, yeah.
identified, I mean, when you think about what's going on here is uh, this bird is capable of understanding English, spoken English language and interpreting that
Yeah,
into
associating a
specific
sound.
action. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's
Which
abstract
is,
thought. And there have been some of them have escaped in England and had really interesting adventures. There was one that escaped from the London Zoo about a year or two ago named Louis, who spent 2 weeks on the lam in North London in Camden. He was seen walking down the Kilburn High Street. Someone saw him, quote, ripping into a whole cooked chicken. And then finally the zoo recaptured him and they said they weighed him up and he was fine. He had somehow survived, figured out ways to live for 2 weeks in an urban environment with absolutely no way of understanding that from any private or any previous experience.
wow, incredible,
Yeah.
incredible. Okay. Yeah, there's no other questions in the chat that I see. So, I want to thank you very much for your time and
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
for being with us. And, to everyone, I you need to understand the level of dedication that Jonathan has. This young man just got married yesterday evening,
Did.
and yet he is spending this time with us. And I think that is absolutely remarkable and deserving of recognition.
Oh, thank
So,
you. I'm, any chance I have to talk about this story and get it out of my own head and into others is a joy for me. Oh, we have one question here. Do male and female pairs stay together? How long do they stay with their young? There is a fair degree of in territorial birds that we've seen in the Falklands, monogamy in pairs. Sometimes it's seasonal. There's studies of crested caracaras that live in South Florida. One of my just favorite little anecdotes from that was a researcher named Joan Morrison who did a lot of work with them. But she had two adjacent pairs along a river that in succeeding years, she had them banded so she could tell them apart, but they swapped mates. One year she went back and the male from one pair was with the female of the other one. And then the following year they swapped back and I think they stayed. So they decided they'd check that out and then figured they'd go back to where they were.
yeah, that
Sometimes
is
there are even, I mean, I mentioned the red throats that have these really strange family arrangements that we don't understand. And I've seen groups of 3 and 4 striated caracaras sometimes that all display together and defend a territory together and feed their chicks together. But largely, as far as we can tell, there are just monogamous pairs, at least within a season, and sometimes
Yeah.
for longer.
Well, you talked about the caracara was it Bolivia that came that
In La Paz, yeah,
La
yeah, it
Paz,
was,
yes.
yeah, and that was a
And you
trio.
said that
Yep,
and it was 3 of them that got together, right?
yep.
So yeah, safety in numbers, and I guess it goes to show the need for social interaction, which is
Yeah, I mean, there's different. This happens across a lot of different species of birds and birds of prey. in general, and there's different thoughts about why it might happen. It could be an indicator that like the available habitat is kind of saturated and a bird's making a choice that, well, it's better to sort of like pair up with another pair than to try to go it alone for a time. But it's different reasons, different sort of environmental reasons can help lead to this kind of situation.
Right, right. Interesting. Very, very fascinating. Very fascinating.
But like with the red throats, we don't know if it's like, is there a pair and then there's just a bunch of their offspring that are kind of helping them out until they can start their own? Is there one bird that does the breeding? Is there is there one female that's actually laying the eggs? We don't know. And that was the main takeaway from the entire book. Was I was just astonished that so little was known about a group of big flashy birds of prey. If that's true, think what else might be true about animals that are less visible, less accessible, and there's just a great deal we don't know about the natural world, and it's as exciting a time as the 19th century in that way, if you have the eyes to see it.
That is so very true. We are just now discovering the extent of bird intelligence and understanding it through a completely different lens than what we used to have.
Yeah, the book talks about that too. I won't get into that now, but it talks about some of the physiology of birds' brains and the appreciation that we have for them now.
So there is one last question here about what are predators for caracaras?
In the Falklands, that's an interesting question. I would have said there aren't any, except for the fact that I did find one bird that seemed to have been killed by a peregrine. There are peregrine falcons in the Falklands. They've come into South America relatively recently, like maybe the last million years or less. So that lineage that I mentioned, having gone north and gone into the rest of the northern world, has come back into South America, where it hangs out with caracaras and the forest falcons, and the laughing falcon, and some other unusual falcons there. Citation for the Mercury study, Ulises Balsa, Balza. And I think it might have been Polar Biology, but I can't remember the publication exactly. But Ulises, Ulises, Balsa, Balza, published the Mercury study.
Wow, yeah, that's disturbing information. Okay.
Right.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our hour. Jonathan, thank you again
Thank you so much, Britt. I appreciate it. It was great to talk to you.
It was absolutely fascinating, and I have enjoyed your book enormously. Highly recommend it.
Here it is again, The Most Remarkable Creature, and it has a lot of these pictures that I showed you in it, in a nice color photo insert. So even if you get tired of reading, you can look at the pictures.
So yeah, and available at bookstores everywhere. So so again, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it. And
all right. Hope the festival
good night,
goes well.
everybody. Certainly appreciate everybody's attendance. Thank you so much for showing up. Don't forget about our Monarch and Pollinator Festival this Saturday at Confluence Park, and also the one on the October 23rd, a week from this Saturday, in Bernie, Texas, sponsored by the Cibolo Conservation Center. So thank you again, everyone. Take care. Have a good evening.